Ukraine's president warned on Wednesday that Russia was planning a massive attack. That attack hit across several Ukrainian cities in the early hours of Thursday, causing fatalities and injuries across the country. Take a look at these images. These are from the western Ukrainian city of Lviv, where missile strikes set fire to two large residential buildings. Now, Russian missiles killed 6 people, including 2 children, in a family home in the city of Kyiv. More deaths were reported in the Poltava region and in the capital Kyiv, where multiple explosions were heard in the early hours. Thousands of people took shelter in Kyiv's metro stations amid warnings of an impending attack. Now, meanwhile, the Polish Prime Minister, Donald Tusk, says authorities believe a Russian missile landed inside Poland on Thursday morning. Authorities are investigating a 10-metre-wide crater at a site around 50 kilometres from the border with Ukraine. Police are saying they received reports of a loud explosion near the village of Tarnowa Kolonia early Thursday morning. An unidentified object was detected in Polish airspace just before that. And as the attacks took place, Poland proactively scrambled fighter jets to protect its airspace. Now, all of this happened just days after President Zelenskyy met with the US President Donald Trump in Washington, D.C. Zelenskyy urged Trump to grant Ukraine a license to manufacture Patriot interceptor missiles. Those are the only air defence ammunition capable of shooting down Russia's ballistic missiles. And President Zelenskyy confirmed after his meeting with Trump that Ukraine would now start producing the American defence systems under licence. So, a massive Russian attack across Ukraine and a potential violation of Polish airspace by a Russian missile. I'm going to be talking to a former British defence attaché who served in Kyiv and in Moscow about that incident, that explosion in Poland, in just a moment. First of all, I want to get a sense of things in the Ukrainian capital right now. Nick Connolly is DW's correspondent in Kyiv. Nick, I'm sure you didn't get a whole lot of sleep with those attacks on Kyiv last night. Tell us about it. How are you?
It was certainly a very long night for people here in Kyiv. They'd had the warnings from President Zelenskyy, which is, the tone of the warnings was a little more immediate and a lot more stark than you would usually hear. So people really did heed that, and there were people going down to the metro already at 8, 9 p.m. getting ready for the night, trying to get a spot, putting up their tents on the platform of the metro stations, just not wanting to have to look for shelter while the missiles were flying. It started about 1 in the morning local time with some very loud bangs that were basically within a couple of seconds, it felt, of the air raid signal warning going out. After that, there was longer stretches of quiet. Then we had drones, we had cruise missiles. I think for Kyiv itself, it was less extreme, less of an attack than people might have expected. Yes, there is currently talk of 1 fatality here in Kyiv, but we've seen many more in recent weeks, so comparatively less of a kind of big attack than people might have feared. But obviously the geography of this was very wide. You had people in the south, in Kyiv, losing their lives, in the west, in Lviv, places that don't see missile attacks every week or even every month. So that was a real sense that the whole country was under attack at the same time. And where we've seen in recent weeks Russia just sending a few ballistic missiles at a time while they can, because there's no effective air defence. We really saw this kind of old tactic that we were used to from previous years of trying to overwhelm the entire system with drones, cruise missiles and ballistic missiles all at once.
So there were major warnings. I mean, we've seen footage of the really overcrowded underground metro stations in Kyiv where people were seeking shelter. I believe you were down in one of those metro stations as well. Just give us a sense of what it's like down there. I mean, is it hot? Is it loud? How long do people tend to stay down there for?
So last night I was in my shelter at home, which is, I'm lucky I live in a building that was constructed in the 1950s when basically the Soviet Union was planning for nuclear war, and that's why these buildings have often improved shelters with those kind of heavy metal doors and lots of facilities down there. I have been to the metro station in previous years during the attacks. It really depends, right? The Kyiv metro system is for the most part, very, very deep. So often you have two sets of escalators to take you down deep. Partly that's because they were also built for the kind of scenario of nuclear war, and partly it's because of the geography of the hills of Kyiv. But often, you do have a real, lack of space. You have lots of people. There were reports last night of people being turned away because their stations were already full, which is not something they're supposed to be allowed to do. And a lot of criticism on social media here of Kyiv Mayor Klitschko and also the authorities more widely that time and time again there's been promises to create more shelter space for the population, and not enough has been done. Or if they are in the process of doing it, they're not ready yet, or they're not open when people actually need them. So a lot of kind of criticism there. I think realistically, very few places in the world have enough shelter space for the population of a big city like Kyiv, especially with lots of internally displaced people right now. But certainly it is a strange atmosphere, people trying to kind of insulate themselves down with their kind of noise-cancelling earphones, sometimes in little tents with their pets often, trying to somehow get through it. And there are people, not many, but there are people who routinely go down every night because they just don't want to kind of live with that kind of background anxiety of having to get up in the middle of the night. So they just go down and get as good an amount of sleep as they are able to get, and then try and get the rest of sleep during the day. All of that means that people's productivity is a lot reduced, and also people's nervous systems are obviously kind of very worn thin over these years. People in big cities in Ukraine haven't had a decent night's sleep since this war began.
And that's 4.5 years, isn't it? I mean, after these latest attacks across the country, several people killed, as you mentioned. Describe the feeling, the mindset in Ukraine on a morning like this.
I think people have a certain routine about all this, right? This is not new, so there is a kind of routine of trying to get some sleep once the air raid alert is over. You see very long queues outside the cafes, people trying to kind of caffeinate their way out of all this. You see people being quite kind of patient with each other, but I think everyone is slightly kind of on autopilot, so people kind of being a bit slow, a bit more kind of gracious with each other than they might otherwise be in a big city with the kind of normal churn. And there is the kind of normal pattern of a couple of days where people kind of slightly kind of win back that sleep, get over that tiredness and that kind of nervous exhaustion, and then the next attack comes. I think in terms of kind of dealing with this, I think there is a sense here that no number of missiles is actually going to stop all these interceptors. There's never going to be enough to stop those Russian missiles. The only solution is to attack the Russian missile production facilities and the missile launchers, because there is never going to be enough supply from the US for those Patriots to stop all those ballistic missiles coming in.
Volodymyr Zelenskyy met Donald Trump at the White House just a few days ago. Right after that, he confirmed that Ukraine was going to start producing the American Patriot interceptor missiles under license. How important is that for Ukraine and for how people are feeling about the war?
I think it's certainly a very positive signal. People are happy to hear that, but that's not going to be happening. The reality is the production is only going to be at the earliest years away, not months. So that doesn't do anything for people right now. And even when Ukraine gets the license to actually produce these missiles with American technology, they're still dependent on American spare parts, and there's been real problems there for Japan and Germany that already have the license to produce these American interceptors, but they are still so dependent on those spare parts, on those components rather, coming from the US, and they're not allowed to substitute them with their own components. So that's the big issue. Ukraine is trying to produce its own interceptors, basically kind of bring together all the kind of different European defense manufacturers and creating a kind of Frankenstein system with a radar from here, some sensors from another company, and trying to make it all work. That is expected to be ready earlier. Whether it's as effective against ballistic missiles as Patriot, we don't know. The European system, SAMP-T, that was meant to do the same job, has demonstrably not been able to intercept those missiles, so that's been a real blow. But I think people here are increasingly thinking about how can we attack those Russian missile launchers, because they have been bringing missile launchers closer to Ukraine's borders using S-400 anti-missile defense systems rather as attack systems. So they've been kind of redesigning those intercept systems to actually attack Ukraine. And the problem is, because they are so close to the border, basically those ballistic missiles get here so quickly that the alerts are just not able to kind of give people much time to get to safety. So you've got, a bit like in Kharkiv, now in Kyiv, you have a situation where you hear the alert and often 10, 20, 30 seconds later you hear the bang.
What about diplomacy? When Zelenskyy and Trump met, they both said it was a positive meeting. They discussed diplomacy to end the war with Russia. And now we're hearing that US envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner may soon visit Ukraine. That would be for the first time. Do Ukrainians see that as a positive development and sort of the way to bring things to an end, potentially?
I think the bar is so low in terms of relations with Trump's White House that any kind of polite read-off from a meeting, any meeting that doesn't involve a shouting match in the Oval Office is already seen as a win. The fact is, Trump has basically ended US help for Ukraine, right? There's no money flowing. It's 99% down. Even the kind of very minimal sums still left are not being spent to give Ukraine weapons. Right now, the only game in town is European cash being used to buy American weapons for Ukraine, but it's not clear whether Ukraine will stay at the top of the list in terms of getting stuff as early as possible, right? There are lots of other US allies that are, lobbying to get those supplies earlier. And then there's intelligence, right? Ukraine does need US intelligence for, working out what Russia is planning in terms of missile attacks. That is still kind of the one thing maybe that Trump has leverage with. But broadly right now, I think there is no sense here in Kyiv that peace is anywhere close. Putin is still basically demanding the same things he was demanding in 2022. We had the president of Kazakhstan calling Putin out at a meeting recently saying it's time to kind of freeze this war. And then Putin and his spokespeople basically saying that is not on the cards, that is not anywhere close to happening. If Witkoff and Kushner get on the train finally and come to Kiev, that obviously will be a first step, right? We've heard from them that they're basically reluctant to take the long journey to Kiev and are much happier getting in their private jets to meet Russians in the Middle East or in Europe. But I think there's no real sense here that anything has changed about what Putin wants to do.
Nick Connolly in Kyiv. Thank you so much, Nick. Let's talk about the other thing that happened last night, and that's the potential Russian missile strike in Poland, about 50 kilometres from the Ukrainian border. The Polish Prime Minister, Donald Tusk, says all indications are that it was a Russian Kh-101 ballistic missile. Tusk told an emergency meeting that authorities want to be 100% certain about the type and who launched it. So how significant is this, given it's happening in Poland, which is a NATO member? I'm going to discuss this with John Foreman. He served as UK Defence Attaché in Moscow from 2019 to 2022. He was previously UK Defence Attaché in Kyiv and has also had military diplomatic appointments in the US with NATO and the EU. Thank you so much, John, for being with us. Can you tell us, first of all, what you know about this situation so far?
Firstly, I'd put it in the context of massive Russian airstrikes across Ukraine last night. Many towns were hit, many civilians have been killed and wounded. So I think that's firstly my thoughts. I think what has happened here, again, is part of a pattern of behaviour, is that Russian missile fired at perhaps Lviv in the west of Ukraine, crossed the border, has impacted into Poland. Now, these missiles, I was looking up the details, 3,500 kilometre range, subsonic, fired by bombers, and it's a cruise missile, not a ballistic missile. And it's not the first time that Russia's done this. In 2023, the Russian missile, crossed into Poland and went 500 kilometres inside Poland. So it's part of a reckless pattern of behaviour.
The Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk is saying that he'll be travelling to the scene, that an investigation is underway to establish what exactly this is. Obviously, they're being careful. But what does Poland's response so far tell us about how seriously the authorities are treating this incident?
Well, I think Poland's been treating these incursions, which have been going on since 2022, with increased seriousness as each one's come along. And as I said, it's part of a pattern of behaviour. Each year of the war, things are crossed from Ukraine and Belarus, into Poland. And the real measure of Polish concern is that Polish defence spending has gone up to 4.5% of gross domestic product, one of the leading nations in Europe, in NATO, as a reflection of the seriousness they take it.
Do you think that his presence, the fact that this is obviously being taken very seriously, do you think that this is about national security? Is it also sort of about coordinating coordinating the investigation and reassuring the public? I mean, how is that? How does that balance work?
Sure. I mean, I think Donald Tusk is quite hawkish. And I think we look at the reaction in September 2025 when 17 Russian drones crossed into Poland, probably accidentally. The reaction there was to, one, go to the scene and reassure the Polish people that Poland was doing everything to defend itself. Secondly, was to take the issue to NATO And in response, NATO stepped up with an operation called Eastern Sentry, which was to boost its surveillance and air defence capabilities in the east of Poland, and in fact along the eastern border of NATO. And the third thing was calls for greater air defence inside Ukraine. The problem is that these things are flying over Ukraine and then they pop over the border into Poland. So there's that situation. Poland's just sitting there waiting for these things to cross in. So I think there's always a discussion about, one, can you boost Ukrainian air defences, which is what Zelenskyy was talking to Donald Trump in the White House this week, or two, do you impose a no-fly zone, which to date NATO has been reluctant to do so.
Given that they're now being very careful about identifying the object, I mean, how difficult is it to identify something like this from the crater, from the debris that's been found at the site? What is the process?
Well, I think Donald Tusk has already said it's probably Russian. I would say it's almost certainly Russian. And there's obviously experts in Poland and from allied countries who can pick over the wreckage and work out what exactly it was, because even though it may impact into a crater, there's always lots of bits and pieces of bombs, missiles and drones scattered around, and the experts can get into that. And I think Poland, as well as the UK and Germany, have defence laboratories who are specialised in that sort of thing. So I think it'd be quite easily to work out what sort of missile it was. Mm-hmm. But again, I don't think this is probably deliberate. I think it was probably fired, again, at Ukraine. And because of either Russian incompetence in the targeting process or changing weather or just, electronic warfare, whatever, the missile has gone off course and crossed into Poland. I don't think it was a deliberate attack.
Poland scrambled fighter jets during last night's Russian strikes on Ukraine. Can you tell us what those aircraft are expected to do when, an unidentified object approaches or enters Polish airspace?
I think the problem the Poles have is a lack of warning time. Although these things are flying across Ukraine very quickly, it strikes me that trying to get Polish aircraft in the right place at the right time in a big country is going to be difficult, especially if the thing is moving just below Mach 1, just subsonic. So you may have fighters up to protect against drones, if you're lucky to be in the right place to take out cruise missiles. But as we've seen in the conflict in the Middle East, even the Americans and the Israeli Air Force can't shoot down every form of missile which is coming across it. Because it's a sort of a game of geometry and geography in 3D. If you have your aircraft in one place, they may not be in the right place at the right time. So I think it's an extremely difficult task. I think also you may hear for greater cause for NATO airborne early warning, more fighters and more fixed air defence. But of course, any country, Germany, UK or Poland, can't defend everywhere.
Right. The indications are suggesting that this was a Russian Kh-101 ballistic missile. Can you tell us a little bit about what that kind of missile is, how powerful it is?
Yeah, sure. I think I was just checking before I came online. It's a cruise missile. So the thing is launched by an aircraft. It flies a sort of flat trajectory towards its target, perhaps evading, and then coming down into the target area when it gets closer to its target. A ballistic missile is one which sort of goes up and comes back down again. I would think about these cruise missiles is Russia modernized these missiles in the 1990s, and this is what it's been firing against Ukrainian cities for the last 4 years. The worry, of course, is that Russian missile production, both cruise and ballistic, has gone up. The Ukrainians said the Russians fired 74 against Ukrainian cities last night. And the problem is that Russia isn't using these very discriminately. They're not targeting them carefully. They're using them indiscriminately to terrify the Ukrainian population. And the problem Ukraine's got is actually working out where these things we're heading towards and then how to defend against them. So they are a complicated target. The problem that Poland's got is it could shoot these things down over Ukraine. But of course, to date, it hasn't been willing or able to do so. And I think that's one of the discussions that NATO will be having in due course is how much longer, if Russia's going to carry on ramping up its campaign against Ukraine, how much longer are NATO allies prepared to just sit and watch these things fly into their territory? Right.
The question is, at what point would Poland consult NATO allies about an incident such as this?
Well, there's a mechanism called Article 4 of NATO treaty, which allows any nation has concerns about its own security to go to the North Atlantic Council, which is it's in session already because they already have ambassadors there, to expose their concerns about their own security and also call for action at the NATO level. And this is slightly different from NATO Article 5, which is triggered when you have an armed attack. And I don't think this is an armed attack. So I think what happened last time in 2025, when Poland went to NATO formally under Article 4, was that you had expressions of concern, expressions about solidarity, expressions about how reckless Russia was behaving and increasing the risk to life inside NATO. And then also it then triggered the Eastern Century operation. So I think that's the sort of path that Poland would like to take, is to sort of discuss with ambassadors in Brussels and then NATO to look at how they can further strengthen the air defence of the alliance.
John Foreman, former UK Defence Attaché in Moscow and Kyiv. John, thank you so much for your time. It's been really good talking to you.
Thank you, Anja.
So what do you think? What should NATO do, given that this is likely a Russian missile that has struck Polish territory? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. I'm Anja Kueppers-McKinnon. Thanks for being with us. Thanks for watching.